Hello, this is Heidi. We're just getting started, so you haven't missed anything when you can't hear anything, but thanks for letting us know. I am going to introduce Dan Kale today and just thank you all for joining us again. Mary will be leading the session, and we're going to turn it over to Dan quickly. So as you may have seen from the bio in the Moodle site, Dan is with Kansas State Research and Extension and doing great work there. So I'll turn it over to Dan to share a little bit more about the things specifically that he's doing. But again, he's been with us for several years now, and it's another great presentation. So thanks for joining us. Go ahead, Dan.
Thank you, and Mary. Welcome, everybody. This is Dan Kale, and I'm joining you from Manton, Kansas, at Kansas State University today, where it is an amazingly beautiful, colorful fall afternoon, and where you are as well. I'm here today. I'll say a word of introduction about myself. I'm an instructor with K-State Research and Extension in the field of community development. I serve as the Extension Liaison with the Center for Engagement and Community Development, which is a university initiative to better provide outreach and connections between the resources and expertise and research of the university with communities and through extension and with communities across the state. I had history for about years. I worked with communities across the state of Kansas, helping them organize and mobilize for community improvement initiatives. That was through the Kansas Pride program. And I've also been very involved in, most recently, a community coaching academy that's really helping to look at how extension persons or others can help work with a local coalition over time to help them maintain focus and provide effective work as they think about their projects that they're working on, measuring the impact of those projects, and thinking about how those projects might be sustained. I'm very involved in public issue forum facilitation and other types of professional development. But I want to talk to you this morning or today and for about the next 70 minutes. We explore community power dynamics. And so let me start by sharing kind of a story. About a year or so ago, I was working on my dissertation, and it was in a rural community. And I had a primary research goal of asking citizens how they felt about their own kind of abilities, perceived abilities to be able to bring about meaningful change within the community. And so when I ask people, tell me about, how you feel about your ability to affect meaningful change in the community, it really became clear that this is a two-level question. It's whether they felt they had the capacity and kind of the leadership and the ability to bring about, to work with others to bring about meaningful change. That could be interpreted, though, when I ask them about their ability to bring about change in the community, is at a level of, is the community receptive, or are barriers in the community that kind of prevent or hold people back from being able to be involved in making those meaningful changes? And it actually helps to inform and inspire this conversation today. And this is one that I'm very excited about. And I will say quickly, even before we talk about our objectives, the idea of power is one of those topics that once you start to do search and study, it becomes this wormhole that you can get very deeply involved in it. But for our function today, and for the purpose of kind of an introduction to understanding community power dynamics, what I want to do is to identify the power dynamics within a community. What does that look like? How do you determine that? We'll look at some key concepts of community power, authority, and leadership. And we'll talk about how those concepts have changed. And through time, some places faster than others. How have expectations or understandings of community power structure, how has that changed through the time? And in instances, there hasn't been a great deal of change through time. I also want to end today's time together by really looking at and thinking about why community issues in today's reality do different types of power and leadership structure. Before I go on, I do want to also give credit. This initial webinar and my kind of into this framework was through Dr. Janet Ayers at Purdue University. And I do want to note that she had a great deal of influence in our session that we're talking about today. Community, and what I'd like you to do, I understand some of you are meeting in groups and some of you are individual, but I'm going to ask you to, if you would, if you're a discussion, and if you're alone listening to this, give us a response. But tell me, in the community, and this might be the one where you're currently living or one that you're working in, who are people or organizations that influence community decisions? We'll start with the question. And if you could respond, I would appreciate it. Community or a community that you have in mind that you've been working in, who are some of those people or organizations who...
This is Mary. Do you mean the roles that they play, or do you mean who specifically?
Probably the roles that they play. Yeah, we won't know their names, but yeah. Thanks for that clarification. I see the county manager, business, government leaders, department heads, local fire department. That's interesting. Representatives, local. So, if you're thinking about this, what is it about these people? Why did you identify them? I know your computer's saying, what's he mean? The question really is, there are a couple of key people or organizations that came to mind. Why is that? I mean, is it that they're the ones that do, or is it that they're the go-to people? Certain authority, wisdom, power, what is it that makes people you identified? Wow, this is good. Okay, thank you guys for typing in and responding. Because they're trusted individuals. Yeah, they have power to create legislation. Okay, so mandates, I like that. Trust and faith, excellent. The folks say money is power, and boy, what gives them power is that they are in control of money, and I like they know everything. Oh gosh, that's a little thing, isn't it? They have that obligate them to some decision making. They have credibility. They are elected leaders. These are all good answers. And so when you think about these people, and we talked about people that are elected officials or on some appointed, or maybe they have money, they're just wealthy. But describe that person, if you would. Characteristics of that person be? That's the question I would to go ahead. Yeah. Oh, good. Thank you. Strong skills, strong social skills. There's it's amazing what confidence can do, isn't it? How far it'll get you. Even if you're talking about, if you say it confidently. Leadership skills, History of participation, commitment, passion. I think this is excellent. I appreciate your responses because these are very good. They know where to get money. They help educate others. In dissertation work, and it's probably not groundbreaking because I think you all know it, but folks about those, what are some of the limits or characteristics that help people move forward? And they said, well, having money, strong social networks, having a history in the community, these are all things that can impact your ability to bring about meaningful change in the community. And so, and I'll say that this is, or at least I hope that this is shifting. But historically in communities, there have been individuals that have been kind of identified as the power holders. And for those typically, often, 40 to 65, middle to age to a little beyond age, typically resources, they have above average income, they are educated, and maybe, I don't know if they know everything, but they are educated. That is an asset that gives them credibility or influence. For professional occupations, long-term, I will say that not the average person in a community, and the leadership or the power holders in a community may reflect the diversity of the population. They do control those key resources in the community. And so when you think about kind of calling the shots, you can get a sense of some of these individuals that tend to be in power. What I think is very interesting individual power literature. And from this point forward, we're going to diverge from thinking about individuals to talking about how it manifests itself at the community level. But if you're interested, there's a psychologist from France. His name is Pierre Bourdieu. He addressed cultural power, and so if you're interested in some reading, I would suggest Pierre Bourdieu.
Dan, question in the chat box around gender. And are influentials typically male?
You're into leadership theory. There's actually a leadership theory called the Great Man Theory. And if you look back through history, the influentials typically are male. Now, that doesn't, all that is that's kind of, at the United States, that's a social norm. It's a cultural attribute that we look at our males to be leaders. I think that's changing than others. And that's kind of the point of this conversation is that does give individuals or persons that leadership ability. Let me add that all these of the historic characteristics of influentials, being 50 years old, a healthy, white, educated business professional, do influence necessarily if you're context. I mean, I think of the individual in a village, and they lose a lot of their power resources. That stature all of a sudden is taken away, and so some of this is contextual. But historically, in the United States, we do see that. That's kind of spurring some conversations, but from University of Maine, it says we're talking whether the males have those formal roles and look like influentials, but women may have informal roles of power, and I would agree totally. I'm not saying that these people actually are the power holders, and we'll kind of start to explore that and tease it apart. However, historically speaking, in America, you do see that these are how people typically refer to or power. Let me also by saying that Stephen Lukes has done some excellent work of individual and social power. He's got a book called Power, and also a second book called Power, A Radical View. It's very good if you're looking for more reading. I'll comment more on additional types of power as we continue. But let's community level. Let's move from thinking of what an individual has that gives them symbolic power or influence, and start to think about these competing at a community level. And social group theories actually is this of pluralism. Now, this actually comes from a concept that pluralism would be to describe that individuals have voice, they have vote, they have resources, they have power, and that individually we can assert that. We can vote, we can assert ourselves, we can vote with our feet, we can vote with our dollars. And so community power is really a way that democracies work. Not a dominant source, but it's distributed across the community. Now, community groups might organize or amass around issues, but typically speaking, one perspective or theory on power is this idea of pluralism. It's individually focused, and individuals can make choices and assert their power. This is, in my mind, an example. I was to think of an example, and maybe it's kind of evident, but if you think about a community or an organization that might represent this type of power structure, what comes to mind? You're saying that way, right? I'm not seeing any typing. Community or organization that really exemplifies that everybody has voice, vote, and is a part of making the system work. Ostrom's work, good. Co-ops. The most systems have diffuse power or across various scales, and unions. Oh, that's a great example. Unions, fully. Really stems from Robert Dahl's work. Is a kind of study of pluralism, who democracy and power in an American city. It goes back to 1961. But looking at kind of this whole concept of community power being that we have voice and we all have vote, and we can all bring about kind of meaningful change. On a grand scale, it is our democracy at work. And if you think about, it really in 2008 with the presidential election that they were suggesting that the power of the election was in giving small amounts of money, $25 here and there, and kind of emphasized it in my mind through the election in that they kept holding up Joe the plumber. He was it's kind of this symbolic everyman of, hey, we all have voice and vote. Well, thinking about this on a community level, say, and this is my terrible working with the computer and trying to draw, I could have drawn X's, I guess, but these little circles are meaning that the population is spread out across the community. They're organizing and pulling together in groups, but then it's just very broadly dispersed. So one kind of type of way about power. But after Robert Dahl, Robert Dahl was in response to another work, that competing theory about community power, and that's actually the work by C. Wright Mills and the Power Elite. Preceded the work, but it's that really saying, power isn't equally shared. It's there are a small group of individuals that are in control of the power and resources. They are the wealthy. They are the people that are also really in control of the public agenda, of what you talked about and what doesn't. And so this is a very hierarchical approach. It's to look at those folks that are in charge. The kings and kingers. We have an ag econ professor that made a career out of going around and talking with folks about identifying who are kings, who are those people that are in the positional authority, and kingmakers are those people that the kings consult before they make a decision, the real power holders. And it's kind of along this kind of theme or idea of elitism. It's based on wealth and privilege, and there are ways of kind of assessing power. And so that was this last one, and I'll come back to these. But a relational technique is one where you go into a community and who's the most influential change makers, or who has the most power or ability to make change. And if you ask 10 people, you might hear a common answer among all of those, and so they would have a reputation that's broadly shared as being a power holder. And if you look at my at my poor ability to represent that in a community, it's middle. You've got influence at the top. Maybe it's one person, a family, or a very tight-knitted group, but it's very much a hierarchy. Well, keep going, because there are kind of community theories, and one is saying, well, not just an individual, but it's more of a class-based system. And this says that there's a family or a group, or are you getting beeps on my phone? Okay. Thank you. Was good. Thank you, Annie. So it basically says there's a ruling class, and that it's a group of people with education, higher income. They may have shared wealth through generations or greater access to resources, but that there's a paradigm that it's classism. And so it's similar to elitism, only it's saying it's not just an individual or a small group, but it's a whole class of folks. I know this looks like a cloud and hail or something, but it's the dominant class. Yeah, that's hard to represent visually. It really is. You're familiar with classism. Another model that's a bit of a similar to classism, a bit of a variation, and that's Harvey Moltach in 1976 published "City as a Growth Machine," and he identified this growth machine idea, that it's a coalition of groups that are pursuing economic gain in a community, working together to encourage growth and try to capture economic benefits, and that these groups, maybe a combination of interests. It could be anything from people that are the builders or developers, construction, bankers, real estate, home insurance, but in some way that they all have kind of the shared or interest in economic growth, and so they team up and kind of help push agenda forward that is economically growth oriented. And again, it's tough to visually represent, but there are special interest groups that are kind of coming together to push an agenda forward. Can you think of examples of, I've used the three. I mean, we talked a little bit about pluralism, and you said that there are some unions and groups that would be very pluralistic, that they would have voice and vote, and just that's how decisions are made. Yes or no question, but have you encountered communities that seem to be more representative of elitism or this growth machine mentality, and maybe type which one? I mean, have you seen examples or kind of models illustrated in communities that you know of or have worked with? Let me, if you could, say yes, elitism, or yes, classism, or yes, growth machine. Not at all. Thank you, Jane. Bangor, if built, could be considered a growth machine model. Oh,
Dan? I think we have lost Dan.
I'm going to encourage him to call in. We couldn't hear him again, so.
Okay. For the rest of you, while we're waiting to find Dan again, please feel free to continue the conversation in the chat box.
So sent him a message.
I am back.
Are back. Great. Thank you, Dan.
That was just really odd. I don't know what happened.
Did you dial back in? Okay. It happened one other time recently. I have no idea why it's happening either. If you start getting notice that we've lost you again, just do exactly what you did. Hopefully it won't happen again, but in case it does, that seems to sign in.
Okay. Yeah. Unluckily, I was not even pressing a button at the time when I went off. Yeah.
Well, we'll the Halloween gremlins.
There you go. So, well, I would just thank you all for participating and having ideas. This is excellent. And yes, I thought in a lot of these communities, this growth machine approach does seem to be kind of taking over. And economic development is often the priority of many communities, and so it becomes the primary focus, and folks, get to move forward. So I have some questions for you. A computer screen will respond now. Why are we doing this? Understanding the importance of this, of community power dynamics, is important. Not just a rhetorical question. That was really the question. Why is it important that we start to think about and look at these community dynamics? People's participation. We need their investment. Yes. Thank you, Mary. For not to buy in, because it's a term that's really readily and often used. But to me, it's that somebody has an agenda and they need me to go along with it. And if it's an elitist structure, that's exactly what they're asking for. The closest, or actually growth machine, a lot of these, they are buy-in agenda, and they want you to go along with it. If it's a maybe language. It helps us become more strategic when we're educating others for growth. Well, let's do, understanding motivations, why people are involved. Good, seeing lots of good responses. Outcomes are more likely realized. A shared impact, a shared investment of resources as people come together. It kind of goes back to maybe that pluralistic approach. So think about these parts that who has the authority to make those important community decisions. It's important that role clearly identified, or those roles. It's important also to know who controls resources or influences resources. Important as educators to know who isn't part of the decision-making process that should be. Impact the public. And that's that there will be implications, both positive and negative, for citizens. And so who bears the burden and who benefits from public decision-making? And that's part of kind of the conversation of why is it important to understand these power dynamics. To know how to build that community power. If you're a group or a community developer and you have a disempowered group that's struggling for power, it's important to know how to build or strengthen community power or adjust community power, both internally and externally. And I think as professional community developers, this also helps us to be more inclusive and effective in the way that we determine and build and assert programs. And so as we think about the community actors, we can understand, which issues are addressed and which ones are not addressed. Some issues never quite make it to the boardroom or to the city council, and there's a question of why. Is there a group that's disempowered, isn't able to participate? Of those community decisions often will scratch and say, that end up, that it did. And often it's because there's some influence at play. Internal or external resources needed for community action. How to help a group or a community think about those power resources. Let's say there are a couple of ways that a practitioner can do this, and actually fairly well documented and fairly well criticized. Sorry, my voice was giving out. The technique is one that I had mentioned early, where they say if you go and you survey 20 people and 15 of them point their finger at one individual, you sense that that's a power holder in the community. There are that have criticized this approach, and they said the approach itself lends it to saying you're looking for kind of this hierarchical or elite effort. In other words, the process going to give you the results that the process you're asking for them to identify one or two people. Necessarily. Use this and you can ask for those key individuals, but you find that you have 20 individuals that are raised up as being most influential in the community, which would then be more of a pluralistic approach. Traditional model, and that basically says, okay, so I'm going to move into a community and I get a good sense of who's in charge and who has power, and so I'm going to look at who these folks are that are in leadership roles already. Has the authority to make those decisions. Third is to look at an event analysis, and basically says, let's look back over the past few years. What are some of the significant community changes that have happened, and who have been the individuals that have been involved. And it helps you to kind of get a sense of, in this case, maybe who the movers and shakers are, but it also gives you a sense of kind of how decisions are being made and who's coming out and who's involved in that. This analysis could tell you that it was a public decision. It came about through some public ballot or agenda. A bond was passed, and again, reflect strong pluralism. Or event analysis might say, you know, you've got individuals that, or it could be the growth machine, or it could be a small number of individuals that are making all the significant changes in the community, for the community. So these different approaches that I hope will help you kind of reflect and move around, kind of assess who those community power actors are. As we talk about a community dynamic, I hope you've seen this model from Flora and Faye, I think is where it was introduced. Understand that there are lots of kind of different elements going on in a community. And you might think about who has power as who the holders of these resources are. Most of the buildings on the main street, or who owns, or who has strong social networks, or a strong cultural history that, you know, the park is in their name. But what we're talking about as we tease this out is this, political capital. Political capital is really things. It's that organization, it's the connections, it's the voice power of individuals within the community. And so do all communities have high political capital, or is it kind of held in small groups? Also then, political capital is, on a community level, is the ability of a group to influence the distribution of resources. Again, who's setting the agenda and who's allowing specifics to be talked about, and which ones don't get talked about. I'm also looking at your notes based on your reading of Those Who Work and Those Who Don't, Poverty and Family in Rural America by Jennifer Sherman. So morally, what does that mean in terms of the community's future? So it means for communities in terms of who holds power and who doesn't. To me, we're helping people have their needs addressed, and why would a community want that shared power? A devil's advocate, but I'd like you to respond to this, because it's easier if we just let the city fathers do their thing. Isn't it more they get? I mean, they have our best interest in mind, right? Please.
I see.
It was very vague. No, why do you want that shared power? What does it mean in terms of, if you're looking at this or taking this as a person that's interested in community development, what does the shared power community mean in terms of community development? So, I can't celebrate for everything. You think I'm to blame for asking a bad question there, but yeah, thinking about shared power scare people. We want support for decisions. Broad investment. We want people to be able to have opportunities and know they have opportunities to participate. We want to think and know what's in their own best interest. Yeah, it has 4 question marks, like, duh. I understand. Good. And we love democracy. You know, as silly as this sounds, you're right. we have this ideal, this ideology, that as Americans we should all be able to have some sense of control in our own futures. And collectively, we want to be able to participate in our collective future. So, we're looking at communities that are sharing power. But as we look back over the conversation thus far, we're finding that there are times where power isn't equally shared or available to everyone. How do you go about creating a shared power world in a community where power is concentrated? Creating that of power or influence or capacity to bring about change. This is, and I'm seeing that you guys are actually really kind of seriously taking a thought approach to this. There are creating a safe environment, making certain that there's communication and conversation, inviting to the table, building those abilities to know how to be able to participate meaningfully. I find that there are a lot of individuals that feel that they just don't have access to those conversations. And so, as a community developer, I think this is incredibly important. Being aware maybe of constraints, decisions are made, how, timing. You want to make sure that there's kind of a level playing field here. I'm with you, University and Rural Community class. Thank you for your responses here too. These are all incredibly important. And so as the research goes, we start to look at understanding how do these kind of community dynamics play out in a community. And I will say here that there's a Community Development Society article called "The Power of Community," and it was by Brennan and Israel. That for me just summarized this incredibly well. They looked at groups and individuals within the community and actually identified kind of a chart that says these don't seem to really step up and exercise their ability. In other words, kind of almost prefer this no choice. If you have read any of Gaventa's work in Africa, there's a sense of quiescence or kind of folks that are not really on the political agenda, but that's okay because they've handed over their power to others. And so look at this. Some communities would have they had a choice, and some felt that they really didn't have a choice in the future of their community. They also identified that there were some negative consequences and some positive consequences to both, and so they identified really 4 different situations within a community of power. I do have this available as a handout, but I think you'll find it really, at least I hope you do. So, ritualized agency. They as citizens, they don't really feel like they have a choice in the community agenda, if you will, or having a say in what happens. And it might be Israel have noted it would be exploit labor in a company town, maybe disenfranchised racial or ethnic minorities. They don't have a voice, and they actually aren't heard, and their interests aren't attended to, and that's a negative consequence. Let me go and talk about no choice consequence, and they call it independent agency. And this is a little bit of a maybe different scenario, but I can actually name a community that has this. The example of maybe the town fathers that do take care of the community, and that the kind of apathetic or uninvolved residents, but mind. An example of that in my mind came that a small rural Iowa community, and a factory that is the dominant employer and owns most of the business interests in town. And because they wanted to make sure that their employees were fit and healthy, they for $1 million athletic facility in a community of population, I think about 500 people. I mean, it was just incredible. And the citizens just love it because this company takes care of them and provides them assets and resources and things that they normally wouldn't have. In this case, the company, in essence, get what they want and do what they want in that community. The community, for the most part, but for the most part, is satisfied with that. And so that's an example of they don't really have a lot of choice, but consequences they don't mind as citizens. There are situations where that might happen. On the other hand, what we were just pushing toward is talking about, citizens ought to have a choice. We often think of, we kind of jump down to that authentic agency, which is down in the lower right corner. And that the community unites, it defeats unwanted extra local development attempts, they're tight, they restore local history and site and community, their culture, and they actually, work well, share power together, and have voice and choice in their own future. And interesting there is that they also gave some negative consequences. Is again, it's very situational, but their complete agency, they're saying, an example of building industrial parks that lay empty. As Brent and Israel have talked about this, it may be that people are given choice, but still the resource holders are withholding resources. And so you get a small team or an organization a coalition that comes together, wants to make change, and they're somewhat limited in their ability to do what they do. So they might make a change and feel good about it, but still is being controlled by someone else. These are unique situations, but I think that this field, looking at communities based on whether the citizens have real effective choice in their future or no choice in their future, and lay that out, and also help us kind of frame and understand the dynamics of the community. Again, in this sense, when they're talking about agency, they're talking about that capacity for local citizens to step up and take action and respond to issues that affect the community. If you've got more questions, I'll refer you there to that handout and to the article, but I think you'll find that fascinating if you're studying this kind of role of community dynamics. So what, let me see if I can get my PowerPoint to advance. 21st century, what would you say are the assumptions expectations that community members hold into their own community power. Work with citizens. What are their assumptions or expectations about their own ability to exercise community power? I see we've got that people believe in shared power. Is that an answer to this question?
From the
So groups are discussing, and for those that are individuals that are online, tell me, what do you think, either from a first person, what are your expectations of being able to assert power in your community, or community groups or coalitions, what are the things that people hold? Is that an odd question? It may be. I'm not seeing a lot of response. Jackie, you. People sometimes will say want others to make those decisions, and so as long as I can be in the choice of the election process, it's all good. In my research, I would talk to people and I say, tell me about whose role is that? And they'd say, oh, that's the role of our elected officials. That's what they do. And they kind of gave that over.
Well, Marian, I'll just while people are talking, I'll just share that I worked in local government education for first started in extension, and it seems like a lot of the times the person that runs for office chooses to do so based on an issue that has sort of unaware or made them angry or challenged them. So it's almost like that. Everything is fine. You're content to just sit in the boat quiet and not make waves until something affects you directly, and then all of a sudden you become an activist. Which I think, Dan, but what have you? Or?
Very much so. I think you're right on. And so I'm reading also, and there's cynicism that people feel disaffected and disenfranchised, so they don't have expectations. This is good. Thank you for these comments. Depends on the community members. Some may elect people to make decisions, others unless something bad happens. Well stated. Good. Good. I hope you all are reading each other's comments because this is exceptional. And I agree. In terms of power and community and expectations, in terms of exercising power, I'm right. I think overall people have an option to be able to have a voice or participate when they want to. I think those that are exercising power to make ethical decisions. I think we expect that it would be fair or just. I think that over the use of power, people are expecting, at least for government, a high level of transparency and accountability. Maybe not government, but maybe organizational power. Good, guys. This is excellent. So there are public expectations of power. I think these public expectations of power may be away from that great man theory approach, or that they're with power and they're just going to take care of things, although there's still some of that. Well, let's look at overall. This is globally terms of power and power use. I found this most interesting. And it's a huge document. It's about 1.5 million pages long, and I don't expect that you'll all read it, but I do hope you will look through it, and you may want to read it. I think I exaggerated. I think it's about 169 pages or something along that line. But the World Bank, or at least it was supported by the World Bank, looked at kind of our perceptions of community engagement, community use, and community development has changed through time. And so I find this helpful because it starts by saying, as we started this in the 50s, we, not just the World Bank, but there were many, many organizations globally and locally that felt that community development, they had the expertise, they had the resources, they just needed to, if we could just let the citizens get out of our way, we'll fix it for them. Kind of this approach of expert model. We have the resources, we will fix it and make their communities better and get them high-speed internet and get them, electricity and plumbing and all these things that they need. In the 60s, that started to change a little bit. They were still developing. There was a green revolution, but you'll notice over on the right column, it's a shift away from being expert-driven and that we know the answers to more, we're going to consult the community members. Sometimes we put a whole lot of money into these communities, and they don't use it, and they don't even appreciate what we're doing. So let's consult first. You'll notice through the 70s and 80s, again through this document, they said there's a shift from consulting the community members to actually asking them to participate. So there was some more community-based development efforts. And so they would look at the target group or the area, and they might have a representative from the community on the board. Again, a sense of kind of participation, and unfortunately, and this is still true today, some participation means that the government or the program as well, we told them what we were going to do. They had a chance to talk about it. So our levels of participation are shifting, but a nice progression through time and through really how we're focusing our efforts to where, as by this in the last 13 years now, it would that the shift has been much more to not just having the resources be held by the outsider and first consulting but then participating, but now saying, what if we were able to help these communities think about and conversations around where to go and help find those resources and access those resources so that they can create the future that is most important for that community. And so for local and community-driven development as a concept, and it's more empowerment. Now I find somewhat encouraging. An outsider might look at this and say, who's empowering whom? I mean, empowering them, because who still owns the resources? And more so, I think as we think about models for community development in relation to community power structure, we're thinking that sustainable, resilient communities need to be able to be in a position where they're making decisions for themselves, utilizing and accessing resources effectively, and are sharing as inclusive as possible, so that that work is owned and created by the community itself. So it turned out interesting, and I hope you're able to look through that document. It is a big one, and it's not required reading, but I think you'll find it also that it's coming from kind of global lessons learned perspective. How do we build power? What we have to realize is that if you're thinking about power as a zero-sum pie, in other words, if one person loses power, if one person gains power, someone else has to lose power. If that's your perception, it's to encourage in a community. you perceive power in that I have power and you have power. We together have three to the power, that it's synergy and it's not that I give up for you to gain or that you give up for me to gain, but that if we both are powerful, that it creates a more powerful community. To recognize opportunities and start to create some collaborative efforts together. So what are some tactics that you maybe have used to help communities think about share power or participate together to create power? Finding an interest is right on. There are many and type in or Jacqueline. And a cafe approach is a process to help people together and have an opportunity to have voice. I think it's oh gosh, I lost my reference. Basically saying that violence was the result of people not having voice. And I lost who I can attribute that to. But having a community cafe approach or a process in place that will allow people to come together to start to talk about shared future. Many are being say, visioning creates an opportunity for expanded and participation and voice in community development. And so that process can be important for sure. To their elected officials on a regular basis. Yeah, and most don't always do that, but it's part of that relationship sharing. Sharing information, it's sharing needs, it's sharing ideas, it's crafting solutions together. None of that happens if we're not communicating. Thank you. So letting the groups you work with know how long you'll be in, how around for. So take it you're a resource provider or a consultant of some type or a colleague or a coach that's helping work with them. I was told that community development was a dangerous line of work. I thought, well, that's a little dramatic. I mean, how dangerous can it be? I've never been chased out of town. I only come with the best intentions. It took me a while, but it has sunk in what was meant by that. And community development, I think, is dangerous in that it's not there for the duration of commitment. Sometimes communities will hear a consultant or a community developer or an outsider ought to do, and it may for one reason or another, and so they'll start again and again and again. And now I get calls from communities that say, we've done 4 different visions, and none of them work. Well, it work. You can put a group of people, and they start to lose faith and interest in working together. So it is dangerous work in that sense, is they do need to have a duration of commitment. The ability, I think, to help them for the long haul. Well, again, how can the community build power? From a field perspective, and a field perspective basically says we're all individuals, kind of in a pluralistic idea. We're all individuals in this field. We have access to resources. We all have capital assets. And when we start to come together and share in a common purpose and on a common effort, or take some kind of common action, we are redirecting and rechanneling our power assets. And it does shift the power at a community level. And so building a community coalition, think of that, of how that's perceived at a community level. Is it being perceived as taking power away from somebody, or is it perceived that they will generate and bring new power, new resources to a community? And so this concept of being able to come together and create collaboratives is actually kind of in the power structure of a community. As you're working with a community group, thinking about how to help share that leadership and not be exclusive, how to help others have involvement. Not saying, well, we invited you to the park to pick up trash, but also identifying what are the issues that are most important to us as a community and listening to that. Having the voice and the prioritization and decision making has been lost, and as it was noted earlier, often we elect those officials and then get busy with something else that we have going on. But opportunities or structures available to help people have voice and participate. And again, developing those structures or systems that allow for that. So I think Nancy has a question, but I'll also ask. I'm going to read that question, but we're thinking about this. What are some of those structures or systems that you've utilized that help community members come together and and ownership? As you think about that, yeah, thank you. I'm going to read Nancy's stuff. I see and hear agencies talk about teaching communities grant writing skills for proposals. Write proposals. We submit them, our communities are not even considered. Okay. Yeah. I'll give you an answer. I don't have a golden answer to that one, Nancy. That's a challenge. But I thought of the funding entities. If you can put your hat on of being a funder, things that I would tell our groups would help them organize and for community improvement is that a group of individuals that come together, track record of success, been inclusive, they're working on because they help to identify the priorities of what's most important for the community, and they are there for, that they to mobilize and tick off maybe a couple of first action steps, but some work that has improved their community. As a funder, I think funders look to that. They look to what we would say is, what's the capacity of this group? Is it a small group? Are they organized? Do they have a structure? Do they have a track record of being able to accomplish things? Are they able to manage? If we give them $100,000, can they deal with that? Can they structure with that? And so it might about their proposals and their partners and how they submit that on the funders' hats of funders are looking for. And I know that's kind of a vague response to that question, but maybe helping funding agencies aware of the capacities of these local groups to actually bring about change. I know that probably didn't really fully answer your question, but I think that you're an advocate for some of these groups that are going to be able to affect meaningful change. With that, folks, I've several resources to highlight that we've used throughout this PowerPoint. Good, again, Brennan and Israel, as you look back at this PowerPoint, if you read that article from the Journal of Community Development Society, they do an excellent job of kind of describing different community power structures, but also highlighting how research and experience has helped us kind of think about community power and what it means when groups align and organize and start to act for community change with kind of that broader community power dynamic. and in other questions, and I'd be happy to field questions. But other than that, I think I'm ready to turn it back to Mary.
Thank you very much, Dan. And if I could ask you to just advance the slide, remind everybody that these resources, as are everything else, available in the Moodle site, as will the recording session, if you want to go back and revisit that. And invite anybody with any last-minute questions to either, raise your hand or go ahead and type in the chat box. And I will tell you that coming up next week, we've got our next to the left session, our penultimate session for the class, Mapping Community Assets, and we'll have Stacy McCullough from the University of Arkansas as our guide for the day, and that should be a really interesting and always an enjoyable one. And I also want to just go back and say what I would have said earlier if I weren't being drowned out by the construction noise downstairs. Thank you to Dan for being willing to step up. He's always our most enthusiastic presenter and facilitator in this class, and all I have to do is send out an email saying we're thinking about it, and he's like the friend that says, yes, let's do it. It's so important. So, Dan, thank you for giving up your time to be with us today. Important topic, which has and not such clear answers, but it's a topic.
Thank you for that. And say, yeah, it's important work. Kind of as a summary, I've been in my dissertation work. I did ask citizens how they perceived kind of their own power structures. And so I'll just add this as a note. Citizens within a community, this is a rural Kansas community, that said this is, life here is pluralism at its best. If you want something changed, all you have to do is say, express a good case and get your friends together and mobilize some resources and make that change. And most of the community, that was pretty true. But people say, nope, classism runs this community. It's the upper class, it's the people with resources. And I have people that said that elitism. And I mean, it was really very interesting that as you went to the community and talked to different people from perspectives, that they saw very differently. And that's what's kind of added to this cloud of a little bit of confusion, is that it's never quite always perfectly clear. That, maybe extreme event, you'd see one and everybody would agree that's what it is. But it isn't quite that clear, and it is challenging. However, I've also seen that for a community's resiliency and for the capacity building that can happen, it's so important to help continue to think about community power dynamics and continue to think about ways to help individuals be heard and have participation in the community. So it's an important topic, and you're right, Mary. It's really not ever crystal clear, but it's something that
would be as much fun if all the answers were easy, right?
Right.
The beauty of community development. Okay, so anyway, I am going to let everyone, I see lots of appreciation and no questions, so Heidi, who will work project with the recording and get it up onto the Moodle site for us, and see you all next week, same time, same place, and we'll proceed with asset mapping. And so we'll let you out a few minutes early today because I know you're dying to get into your Halloween costumes.
Hey guys, you did an excellent job of facilitating this. Thank you so much.
Great, everybody.